So we've got two parts, Daniel A, Daniel B, chapters 1 through 6 that we did the first 2-3 weeks. And you remember those wonderful stories told about Daniel with Daniel in the lion's den and all of those wonderful stories. Then there was the second set, 7 through 12, which we're going to complete today. You did 8 last week. And thank you so very much for Julie and Anita, who co-hosted last time and gave so much about the apocalyptic revelations. So those are the two sections, part in Aramaic, part in Hebrew. Next slide. So again, those two parts are a narrative history of the kings and courts, going from the Babylonian captivity to the Persian court, and looking ahead to Greek and Roman empires and beyond. And the beyond is the prophetic oracle, the apocalyptic material. And Julie so nicely told us about it meant taking off the veil. So it's what's going to happen in the future. And it was actually to calm people down because there was so much distress about all the destruction, all the changes politically. So it actually ends with a sense of hope. Next. So just to review, here are the chapters of the book of Daniel. From chapters 1 through 12, we go through the exile to Babylon, the dream of the king, the fiery furnace, going forward and forward through Nebuchadnezzar's madness, the feast, Daniel in the lion's den. I think that was our favorite, chapter 6. Then the 4 beasts. Chapter 8, you looked at last week, the ram, he goat, and horn, looking ahead to the 70 weeks and the final vision. Now let's talk a little bit about the structure, because in 6 and 7, it was very, very interesting. Next slide, please. All right, we've talked about chiastic form. It's the Greek letter that looks like an X, meaning the first is the last is the first. It's a kind of a cross form, with the center being truly central. So Jenny, take your cursor and show A and A1, a dream of 4 kingdoms, replaced by a 5th. And at the very end, a vision of 4 world kingdoms replaced by a 5th. So you see the beginning and the end are equal. Now let's look at B and B1. Daniel's 3 friends in the fiery furnace corresponds to B, Daniel in the lion's den. See, very similar. And the middle part, Daniel interprets a dream for Nebuchadnezzar, and he also interprets the handwriting on the wall for the next king, and that was many, many tekel. Remember, you have been weighed, wanting, and you will be replaced. So just visually, it goes da-da-da, da-da-da. See that? Now let's look at one chapter, chapter 6, and see that truly also is in chiastic form. Next slide. Again, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Let's look at that. Chapter 6, you have the introduction where Daniel is successful. And at the very end, the conclusion, Daniel also is successful. Then we look at B and B. Darius' edict and Daniel's response corresponds to Darius's edict and doxology. And a doxology is like verses of praise, sort of like Psalm 145, any of those times where you're praising God, that's doxology. C, Daniel's opponent plot his death, and that corresponds to C1, Daniel's opponent sentenced to death. There's a resonance there. And D in the middle, Darius hopes for Daniel's deliverance, and then he witnesses Daniel's deliverance. So it's just really interesting that often you'll find this kind of a chiasm, this going up to a middle point and coming out of the middle point where the first and the last correspond. And that's pretty brilliant writing when you think about it. It's not as easy as saying, well, here's my headline, here's my proof, and here's my conclusion, which is more or less what we do in our writing today. It leads up to the middle, it comes back from the middle, like that. Next. Okay, so what we're going to do now, and you're going to have to call on people because I can only see one person at a time. So maybe Anita can help, or somebody else who's got the view of everything, because I'm only on my iPad. Ask people to read, And I've selected from Sepharia just a few important verses. And that way we'll be able to go through chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12 in really just a few minutes that we have. So call on somebody to read, and each new portion call on someone else, okay?
Daniel chapter 9, first person in Hebrew, recounting captivity by Babylonians and describing it as consequence of having gone astray. All Israel has violated your teaching and gone astray, disobeying you. So the curse and the oath written in the teaching of Moses, the servant of God, have been poured down upon us, for we have sinned against him. He carried out the threat that he made against us and against our rulers who ruled us, to bring upon us great misfortune. Under the whole heaven there has never been done the like of what was done to Jerusalem. Should I go on?
Sure.
O our God, hear now our prayer of your servant and his plea, and show your favor to your desolate sanctuary for the Lord's sake. Incline your ear, O my God, and hear. Open your eyes and see our desolation and the city to which your name is attached. Not because of any merit of ours do we lay our plea before you, but because of your abundant mercies.
Okay, so again, we have this theme of exile and destruction, and a kind of sense that it's caused by our going astray, and we're calling on God's mercy. Next slide, and a new reader.
Daniel hears a response from the Holy One in answer to Daniel's plea. While I was uttering my prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had previously seen in the vision, was sent forth in flight and reached me about the time of the evening offering. He made me understand by speaking to me and saying, Daniel, I have just come forth to give you understanding. A word went forth as you began your plea, and I have come to tell you it, for you are precious. So mark the word and understand the vision. 70 weeks, vis of years, have been decreed for your people and your holy city until the measure of transgression is filled and that of sin complete, until iniquity is expiated and eternal righteousness ushered in, and prophetic vision ratified, literally sealed, and the Holy of Holies anointed.
All right, so he gets an answer in a vision. Next slide, new reader.
Daniel chapter 10, vision of a man dressed in linen. His body was like beryl. His face had the appearance of lightning. His eyes were like flaming torches. His arms and legs had the color of burnished bronze, and the sound of his speech was like the noise of a multitude. I heard him speaking. And when I heard him speaking, overcome by a deep sleep, I lay prostrate on the ground. Then a hand touched me and shook me unto my hands and knees. He said to me, O Daniel, precious man, mark what I say to you and stand up, for I have been sent to you. After he said this to me, I stood up trembling. He then said to me, have no fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your mind to get understanding, practicing abstinence before your God, your prayer was heard, and I have come because of your prayer.
Thank you. Amazing visions. Here's another vision in Daniel 11. Next slide, new reader.
Okay, Marilyn, would you care to read? You would just need to I can unmute you. Marilyn, are you good with reading? No, I'm gonna call on someone else here. Let's see, Julie, would you like to read?
Sure. Daniel 11, review of the kings and empires by the angel or man of Daniel's vision. In the first year of Darius the Mede, I took my stand to strengthen and fortify him. And now I will tell you the truth. Persia will have 3 more kings, and the 4th will be wealthier than them all. By the power he obtains through his wealth, he will stir everyone up against the kingdom of Greece. Then a warrior king will appear who will have an extensive dominion and do as he pleases. But after his appearance, his kingdom will be broken up and scattered to the four winds of heaven, but not for any of his posterity, nor with dominion like that which he had, for his kingdom will be uprooted and belong to others beside these. At the time of the end, the king of the south will lock horns with him, but the king of the north will attack him with chariots and riders and many ships. He will invade lands, sweeping through them like a flood. He will invade the beautiful land too, and many will fall. But these will escape his clutches, Edom, Moab, and the chief part of the Ammonites.
Right. There was a lot of battles and resistance and kings going on there, but I just summarized it there. Next slide.
Okay, Daniel 12, vision of redemption. At that time, the great prince Michael, who stands beside the sons of your people, will appear. It will be a time of trouble, the like of which has never been seen since the nation came into being. At that time, your people will be rescued, all who are found inscribed in the book. Many of those that sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to eternal life, others to reproaches, to everlasting abhorrence. And the knowledgeable will be radiant like the bright expanse of sky, and those who lead the many to righteousness will be like the stars forever and ever.
Thank you. And that's really a vision of redemption in the last chapter of Daniel, number 12. And most of the illustrations I just couldn't use, but I thought this one kind of worked. Next one.
Terry, would you like to read? You're muted. Oh no, you're not muted. We can't hear you. Okay, thank you for trying. We'll come back to you in a bit. How about Anita, would you like to read?
Despite prophecy, Daniel must keep silent. 12:4. But you, Daniel, keep the word secret and seal the book until the time of the end. Many will range far and wide, and knowledge will increase. This reminded me of Jacob. 12:8. I heard and did not understand, so I said, my Lord, what will be the outcome of these things? From the time the regular offering is abolished and an appalling abomination is set up, it will be 1,290 days. Happy the one who waits and reaches 1,335 days. But you go on to the end. You shall rest and arise to your destiny at the end of the days.
Thank you, Anita. Next slide.
Goes, the angel Gabriel reveals to Daniel this additional understanding of the 70 years, extending them from 70 years to 70 weeks of years, stretching the time span to 490 years that span from the destruction of the first temple to the destruction of the second temple. This prophecy also included a description of events that would unfold if the Jewish people did not repent properly. These are the 70 years of the first exile, 52 years until Cyrus, and 18 additional years to dedicate the second temple, and 420 years of the second temple.
Right. So in case you really want more on that, copy the link above and just put it somewhere and look at it another time. But it's really detailed with exact translations, calculations. It was way more than I could do here. I just gave a summary. Next slide. Okay, so you should know that there are various Bibles. There are various Protestant Bibles. There's the Hebrew Bible. There's the Catholic Bible. And the order of the books is different. And in the Catholic Bible, there are additional chapters added to the versions found in the Hebrew Bible. They're added verses of Esther that have her calling on God and making it more holy, if you want, because God is hidden in our vision and in our version, and we don't see Yud-He, Vav-He, or Lord or God explicit. But in their version, they actually add verses. Same thing in addition to Daniel. There's the prayer of Azariah, Susanna and the elders, Bel and the dragon. There are extra books, extra verses, chapters, and explanations that are added, and you should just know that. So I even found a graphic that says the lost chapters of the book of Daniel attributed to Daniel. So they weren't lost books, they were added actually. And this was the Apocrypha, which are, again, these hidden books that were between the Bible and the Talmud. You know, they were sort of in the first centuries, and they're not part of the canonized Bible. Next slide. So let's read about the Apocrypha. Who'd like to read? Probably it should be Julie, because she knows this stuff.
The Apocrypha included in the Catholic Bible, based on the Latin Vulgate of the 4th century, which is based on the Septuagint, a Greek version of the Hebrew Bible in the 3rd century BC. I have to say that the Vulgate is Jerome, and he did have some knowledge of Hebrew. Not saying it was good, but he did have some. So I feel slightly better about him. The Protestant Bible leaves them out since they are not found in the original Hebrew text. The early Protestant leaders wanted to sift out later traditions and get back to basics. So some of these names are Ezra, Tobit, Judith, Allusions to Esther, the Wisdom of Solomon, Ecclesiasticus, Baruch, Maccabees 1 and 2, Susanna, Bel and the Dragon, etc. Several are attributed to known personages to give them more authority. So they're pseudepigraphica, which means they're not written by those famous people.
Right, you know, like real and epigrapha is the name is attributed to so-and-so because, oh, well, if it's Solomon, that's got to be important. You know, so pseudepigrapha is one of your new vocabulary words. So say that with me, pseudepigrapha.
Pseudepigrapha.
That's a very good thing to drop in conversation as well. Apocrypha and pseudepigrapha are the two words today that I wanted to include in our study. And thank you.
Like, what's a way to include it? Like, how do you use it in a sentence?
You'll figure it out. You know, I was studying the Bible the other day, and I noticed that there are these extra books, you know, the pseudepigrapha. They're not really written by the person that it's attributed to.
Yeah.
Like
anyway,
ghostwriting, but we have our own Apocrypha.
It's the same Apocrypha. It's just that's how we get Maccabees.
Right.
It's just not part of the canonized Bible. And the reason we have it is because it was included in later Bibles, but not in our Bible. So we kind of got it back again that way. And they were supposed to be hidden books that you weren't supposed to read, but everybody read them. But I want you to know about it because this isn't something that, you know, you learn in Sunday school or that we even have been touching on really in Torah study. So this was interesting to me. Next slide. All right, these are my conclusions. After all we studied together, and very few people actually study the book of Daniel, even in rabbinical school. So I'm really grateful that we got to study this together. So here are my conclusions. Book of Daniel is partly historical in response to the Babylonian expulsion and exile of the Jews from Judea, and of course, the destruction of the centralized temple in Jerusalem. It was a huge trauma, and the writings that came after wanted to explain it. What happened to us? And they wanted answers. What will happen to us now as a people? Will we always be in exile? Will we always be in danger? What will happen? And the ending of it is a veiled redemptive response about the far future when there will be hope, there will be resolution, there will be a return, there will be an end to exile and dispersion. And we get all of that in the book of Daniel. We get hints of it in other books, but I think it was quite clear here. Next slide. So just to review, many of the visions, the interpretation of dreams, referred to this kind of explanation of how empires rise and fall, how one strong army defeats the current political organization and takes over. And this happened in various ways, with various symbols. So whether it was the statue or it was the beasts or it was the horns, every single time it seemed to go back over the same vision that there was Egypt swallowed by Assyria, swallowed by Babylon, taken over by the Medes, Medio-Persia, which will be then usurped by Greece, which then is overcome by Rome. And in this particular graphic, they show Britain and the USA and the League of Nations, United Nations. And in some of them, you have the kingdom of God. So whether it was in the first two chapters or the last chapters, these elements of symbolic empires keep coming up again and again and again. So I like this chart because it shows a kind of timeline of history, but in a very vibrant, naturalistic form, where it's different animals and they're not quite natural. They have strange horns that grow and get cut off, and rocks that come from outer space, and different elements, gold and silver and bronze and clay and iron. So this just shows how in about 6 different ways we got the same message. One empire will take over another, will take over another, but in the future, Bayom Hahu Yeh Adonai Echad, in the future there'll be one God and God's name will be one, kind of like in our Aleinu prayer at the end of every service. Next slide. This is the tomb of Daniel, which is considered the burial place of our Daniel. And although many locations have been named, but this tomb is in Susa, that's Shushan, that's the capital of Persia, like in the Esther story. So they're really connected a lot. And this place here is the most widely accepted site. And it was mentioned by Benjamin of Tudela, who did a pilgrimage in the 12th century and named that spot. And it looks like it's a mosque at this point. Many sites that were Jewish were taken over by Christian sites, which were taken over by Muslim sites. And so they'll have elements of all of them. But I thought this Persian site of the tomb of Daniel was just quite beautiful to look at. Now, we've been through a lot. We haven't been discussing a lot, but I really wanted to end on a really fun kind of a note and a reminder. So next slide. Let's go back to little Sarah singing about our Daniel.
There's a story in the Bible about 3 brave men. If you've heard it before, you need to hear it again. So listen up, you really need to know about Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. King Nebuchadnezzar made an idol of gold. He said, listen here, people better do what you're told. You better bow down when the music is played, or it's in the fiery furnace 'cause you've disobeyed. So the very first time that the music was played, all the people bowed down 'cause they were afraid. But 3 brave men, they each said no. That was Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Well, the king was so mad when the word got around. He couldn't believe that they didn't bow down. So he asked them why. They said, we're not afraid, for we worship our God and not the idol you made. So the king had them thrown in the furnace of fire, and he turned it way up to make the flames go much higher. And as everyone watched, much to their surprise, that instead of 3 men, there were 4 men inside. And someone said, look, there's an angel in there, and they're not burned, nor their clothes or their hair. And the king cried out, not in all of my days has there ever been a God so worthy of praise. So the king made a decree. It was on that very day. There is no Meshach, Abednego.
Thanks. So Apocrypha are the hidden books, the veiled books, written probably between 200 and 400 CE. And it has to do with being veiled, not being revealed. And that answers Diane's question, I think. It's been quite a journey with the book of Daniel, and seeing elements that we saw from Jacob, where the ending was about to be spoken about, but couldn't be revealed. We saw elements like in the book of Esther, where the king makes a decree and it can't be abrogated, it can't be taken off. The kind of visions where through dream interpretation, like Joseph, he finds favor with the ruler. There are all these elements that were part of the oral tradition in the ancient world and are all put together in the book of Daniel. And whether this was a historical person or it's attributed to a person where it's many folk tales put together, it holds together because it has been edited that way and we receive it that way. And we can look at it as literature, partially history, partially moral teaching, and certainly a kind of comfort to those who want hope and something to look forward to in the future at a time of great upheaval. So that's what I got out of it. I'd love to hear your reactions and any of your comments or questions at this time. Yes, Anita. And again, thank you so much for leading last week. That was a very heavy and difficult one.
It was a challenge and it was good and I learned a lot. And I hope everybody else did too. But, you know, having studied Talmud now for 2 years on Zoom, all these classes, and coming to understand that, especially with the Babylonian Talmud, that they took things from here and there, and they took like historical figures who may or may not have even lived at the same time, even if they did, may or may not have connected with each other. So, I mean, you know, we don't know if Rabbi, I think Shimon Hatzadi connected with Alexander of Macedon, but I'm kind of bifurcated myself. So part of me has that theatrical experience of willing suspension of disbelief and just saying, it's a story, it's a true story, kind of edited, but a true story that tells of our people when we were exiled into Babylon. And then part of me says, and it was totally redacted by later writers. But what's important, as he said, what's important is what do we learn from it? What's the essence? There's the hope, there are the faith. And there's so much that I think is important for us to learn. So does it have to be completely true? I don't know.
Thank you for that, Anita. I mean, all of a sudden you have Gabriel and you have Archangel Michael and you have all these figures who come in to say, Yebeseder, it's going to be okay. Have faith. At a time when it must have been very difficult to have faith because the temple was destroyed and we weren't in our land. And actually we had to make sense of a God that was not geographical, that was not located in one place. And we made that huge leap of God is everywhere and is accessed wherever we are beyond a boundary. That was new. That was new in history. And so that is happening at the same time that Shekhinah goes into exile with her people and weeps with her people, right? We have that in Echa, in Lamentations, and the idea of yearning with your heart to be somewhere, but living where you're living and making it prosperous and full and almost like living in two places at once and knowing that God is with you, even through the dark times. So a lot of that is told there, and it was read throughout history, wherever the Jews lived in whatever land, and I'm sure that they could relate to it from their own historical point of view. Any other responses to this? the visions, to the elements, to the lion with the lamb. Yes, Mary.
So the idea of almost telling us, almost knowing when the end times are going to be, I think reinforces the belief that there really will be such times. You know, like we're so close to knowing that it's hard to say, oh, that was just part of the story.
Right. And together with that, we're supposed to think that the very next action we do, the very next mitzvah we do, the very next statement we do, tips the whole balance of the world. So instead of saying, oh, I'm just doing one thing, what can it help? You go, it tips the entire world. And so we think of that more at High Holy Days, but it's true all the time. And that empowers us to feel enough. And in my Musar group, I'm studying that about enoughness. And what does it mean to think that your talents are enough, that your words are enough, that what you do for other people is enough? Because we all feel we're not enough. And there's something about having a vision that says what you do counts. And not only that, but it's part of a whole plan. It doesn't feel so random. It doesn't feel so scattered. It doesn't feel so without destiny. And since we're all lacking control, we want a sense that somebody's in control, and this helps. This helps us. I'm planning ahead for the readings of Passover, which are out of the normal rolling the Torah from week to week. You know, whenever we get to a festival, we go back to the root, the biblical root of the festival. And in the next 2 weeks, because it happens to fall on Shabbat, we have 2 such weeks. And so there are special readings, again, taking us back to the Exodus and taking us from slavery to freedom in various portions during the week of Passover. And the 8th day has yet another reading and different Haftarahs. So I just want to say that last year, we did the intermediate Haftarah reading, which was about Ezekiel and the dry bones coming together. Again, a vision. All our prophets had visions of, you're doing wrong, you're going astray, but there will be a rebirth, there will be a reconnection, you'll return from exile, the dry bones will get juicy again and will become people in the future, the nation will survive. And this year, I'm going to do the 8th day Haftarah reading about Isaiah 11, one of my favorites, which is from the shoot of Jesse will come, from the trunk of the cut down tree, there will come a little shoot and it will be reinvigorated. So, and we'll have that chanted at the end of Passover at the Friday night service. So what we will be doing in this Torah study is probably next week, something about the Song of Songs, the Shir HaShirim. 1 week, and 1 week we'll do what are the readings during Passover. So one of those 2 will be next week and the week after. But it will follow exactly on this book of Daniel, which again says, what have we done wrong? Not just blaming others for our being defeated, but looking to our own sense of responsibility. Not that that is total. You know, in any calamity, you have a small part. In every accident, you have some small part, even if it seems to come out of nowhere and just hit you in traffic. There's always, you were there. So at this turbulent time with war in Ukraine and with so many refugees and with so much turbulence and violence in the world, we have to constantly look inside and say, what part do I have in this? I'm not in the Russian army, but what part do I have in making the world a better place right now, the way things are, given the situation that has happened? Because if we only look externally and blame, we'll never move from oppression to freedom. We'll never be able to relive the Passover story. We'll never be able to feel enough. We'll never be able to feel that there's faith and hope in some time when God's name will be one and we'll be all united. So out of all of this, preparing for Passover, reading the book of Daniel, doing our Torah study, coming on Wednesday morning minyan, praying for other people who are ill. All of this together is the work that we're doing to purify and make more fine our souls so that our actions are more in line with what God wants us to do, more about healing and repairing, more about taking responsibility, more about using the fact that our souls are within physical bodies. And so we can do the work for which we were placed in this body at this time, in this place, because we didn't have a choice in it, but we have a choice now. What mitzvah are you going to do in the next hour? What help are you going to give in the next day? What are you going to allow in terms of what you see and read and hear and listen to? What are you going to say that is blessing and not cursed? What are you going to do that is helpful and healing? And let us just pray that our words, our deeds, our actions all lead to a hopeful end of days, so that no one else is going to tell us that last chapter. We have to create it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Holy One of blessing, your presence fills creation. Thank you for giving us again today this wonderful opportunity to connect with holiness and study the words of your Torah. Give me an amen.
Amen.